Hello! We're going to talk more about strings and lists and how they work together by exploring 4 unique methods that work with them. So the first is find. So find will search a string and find a match. So this is more of a string-specific method. What it'll do is it'll tell you where the index is that you found the match. So the syntax is my index equals, so you're looking for an index, string dot find, and then whatever partial string you're looking for. So for example, if we were to look at food equals fish taco, right, we know that this is a string, but each letter has an index, just like a list would. And so if you say find C, it's going to give you index of 7, because we would have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 is going to be the C. Now, if instead I try to find a space, that's going to be right here. It's going to give me that index in a string. It would be 4. If I wanted to say, let's find do some calculations with this to find partial words, I could say new food equals food, and now I'm slicing my string. This is the string slice notation. So I say index plus 1 colon, which means go to the end. And so if I were to do that, I would get my new food would be taco, because what I'm going to get is 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's my new list. But because I started at index 4 plus 1, that effectively means I started up here at taco, which is going to be 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can search a string to find a space, and then you could slice it to break it up and do interesting manipulations with it. So this is a very kind of string-focused method. Now let's look at the ones that interact between lists and strings directly. So the first one is called list. Conveniently, it's also called a list. What this does is this converts any kind of string to a list. So you have string in parentheses, you call the list method, and it's going to give you back a new list. So one of the things about these 3 methods we're going to talk about is the syntax is just a little bit confusing sometimes. You want to just kind of understand how each one works. Now, how it gives you a list, though, is it takes every character, every symbol in your string, chops it up, turns it into a list. So this is kind of useful because we know that strings are immutable. So if you want to do some great string manipulation, you can use the list method, the list function rather. It'll break your string up into a bunch of lists essentially of single letter strings. You could then remove or replace or whatever you'd want to do with those letters, add letters, and then you can convert it back into a string in a second. So the list command takes your entire word, breaks it up into every individual letter. For example, if I have the word stir, word equals stir. Now notice this is a string, right? I'll say here this is a string. It's not a list. So if I say letter list equals the list function, list parentheses word, letter list is now a list. And it's a list where every single letter from the string is now an individual item in the list. But now, since it's mutable, a list is mutable, we can do some manipulation. Like I could say letter list bracket 1 equals p. So what that's going to do is it's going to look again at index 1, and it's going to replace the t with a p. So it's much easier to do this, for example, with having this as a list than it would be having it as a string. Also pretty easily, I can now append. So append, because we have a list, I can add things onto the end, just like that. And if I were to print this, it is still a list, right? We still see that this looks like a list. It does not look like a string. When you print a list, you get the bracket, you get the commas. It looks definitely like a list, okay? So the list command, convenient to take a string, manipulate it so you can do some changes to it, but now how do we get it back? So the new other function to look at, or method, is called join. Now, there's a lot of syntax in this, right? We have your new string is equal to something called a delimiter, the join command, and then the list. So there's a lot going on. Let's explore this. This method takes a list of strings, turns it into a new string. So it basically converts a list into a string. So it takes every individual item in the list, squishes it together, gives you back a list. Now, when you separate every item in the final string, you separate them by a symbol called the delimiter. The delimiter is not something special in Python. It's just a term we call for basically any string that's going to separate some characters. The most common delimiters that we're going to see are a space or a comma, but it can really be anything. It's just a symbol that separates other strings. Let's look at an example. So from before, we have letter list. Letter list, again, is a list. It's spire. Now, if I say word equals, and I just put a little symbol in here, this is just a meaningless symbol. It's the little caret and then a dash. So that's in a string, right? This is a string here. String dot join letter list. So the caret dash, this is what I would call my delimiter. Okay? And so when I do this, it's going to combine all of the elements, which is spire, S-P-I-R-E, into a new variable word. So we see S-P-I-R-E is all here. There's my letters. But it separates them by our delimiter. So in this case, we chose the delimiter to be a caret and a dash. So you'll see between every letter, we have this caret and a dash. And so your final result is S caret dash, P caret dash, I caret dash, R caret dash, E. So this is what it looks like to take a list of strings, convert it into a string, straight string. Now, you can do another variation of this. A more common one would be to use an empty string, right? So here is my empty string delimiter. And so when I then combine all of my letters, I get what looks to be more like a string, right? Like a real word. Now, we can use join in more complicated examples, though. This example was converting a bunch of letters back into a word. But let's look at something different. What if we have a word list? Always look on the bright side of life. So it is a long list, not of individual letters, but a long list of actual words. So let's say you want to turn this into like an English sentence. So you would think about, okay, well, what would be the delimiter between words in a sentence? Well, in English, it would be a space, right? So we'd have the space. That is the symbol that would separate different words into a sentence. So now, when I assemble this space.join word list, I get what makes much more sense to look like an actual sentence with strings separated, words separated by spaces. And if I print that out, it looks normal. It looks exactly like a sentence. There's no list notation, etc. So you can use join very easily to take a bunch of letters and turn it back into a word. You can take a bunch of words, turn it back into a sentence. Whatever it is, any list of strings, you can convert together back to being a string. The last function method to look at here is split. And split is really powerful, and we're going to look at it a little bit later as well. So this takes, it separates a string that contains a particular delimiter. Remember, delimiter is just a symbol. So it takes a string that contains a repeating symbol and chops it up into a list. What it does is everywhere in that string you see this repeated symbol, it uses that as the separation point to give you items in the list. Now let's unpack that a little bit. First thing is the most common delimiters we're going to use are going to be space and comma. It really can be anything, but those are the ones that we use. So looking at this example, imagine you had a string, Ron Weasley, comma, Gryffindor, comma, red hair. And then you had another string, Cho Chang, comma, Ravenclaw, comma, black hair. So the most common delimiter that we would see to use would be the comma, right? That would seem most appropriate. That's the symbol that seems most logical in this particular string that separates useful pieces of data. Let's look at a different example. So I have name string equals Cho, Dean, Luna. Okay, so I have a string variable that happens to have this comma throughout it. So we can see that when we want to separate these into a list, what we use is we say my list equals string.split, and then you tell in parentheses what is the symbol you want to break it up on. And in this case, it's going to be a comma. And when you do that, you'll see that it takes your string and it divides it everywhere there is a comma. And that then becomes the basis of your new list. So it's a very useful trick to take this string, which has some repeated symbols, chop it up, turn it into a list. Now, last comment to make here is it can be a little bit confusing between split and strip. So, look at an example. If you have a string that says space, space, hello, my name is Carla, new line, space, space. If you say line.strip and then you print out the result, you can see what it does is it removes all of the white space here at the beginning and all of the white space here at the end. It just completely removes it and throws it away. So strip removes the white space from the beginning and the end of a string. Split is a different story that we just looked at. What it's going to do is it's going to take hello, my name is Rob. It's going to look where this space is, and it's going to remove that space and then separate every item into a list. So this becomes position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can see that's exactly what we get down here. 0, 1, 2, 3,